Imagine you're a traveler in southeastern Kansas in the early 1870s. The country still has the fresh scars of conflict and the promise of a new life, of 160 acres to call your own, has pulled you west. The landscape around you is an immense, unforgiving prairie. It's a lonely expanse where homesteads are scattered like islands in a sea of grass, and your nearest neighbor might be miles away. This is Labette County, a place carved out of land recently ceded by the Osage Nation, a place defined by both boundless opportunity and profound isolation. Your journey follows the Great Osage Trail, a path worn into the earth first by migrating buffalo, then by Native American tribes, and now by the wagons of settlers like yourself. It's a vital artery of westward expansion, but it's also a place of great danger. The weather is harsh and unpredictable, with tornadoes, blizzards, and floods that can erase a homesteader's dreams overnight. Violence is a constant threat, whether from conflicts with displaced tribes or from the battle-hardened American men who now work their way onto the frontier. In this vast emptiness, people simply vanish, and when they disappear, the prairie keeps their secrets. As dusk begins to settle, casting long shadows across the plains, you spot a light. It comes from a small one-room cabin, a welcome sign of life in the desolate landscape. A crude hand-lettered sign above the door reads, "Groceries." This is the Bender Place, a wayside inn offering the promise of a hot meal, supplies, and most importantly, a safe place to rest for the night. For a weary traveler, it seems like a sanctuary, a fragile outpost of civilization where the unspoken code of frontier hospitality offers a moment of peace. You approach, unaware that the trust you're about to place in these strangers is the last mistake you'll ever make. This humble cabin wasn't a refuge, it was a slaughterhouse, and for at least a dozen travelers, this beacon of hope on this great migratory trail was the end of the line. This is the disturbing story of the Benders, a supposed family of innkeepers who committed horrific actions before performing one of American history's greatest vanishing acts. To understand the horror that unfolded in Labette County, one must first try to understand the perpetrators. But the Bender family itself is an enigma, a collection of four individuals whose true identities, origins, and relationships remain a mystery. They presented themselves as a simple homesteading family, but they were a carefully constructed criminal conspiracy, a human machine where each member played a specific and deadly role. The patriarch, John Bender Sr., was a man of about 60, described by those who met him as a repulsive and brutish figure. He was a giant of a man, with piercing eyes and a sullen, ill-tempered demeanor. Like the other members of this so-called family, he claimed to be from Germany. As with all the members of the family, it remains unclear what their true origins were, as German was commonly spoken across Central and Eastern Europe. And to get in my one mandatory Simpsons reference per video, no one who speaks German could be an evil man, right? His wife, Elvira Bender, was around 55 and equally disliked by her neighbors, who called her a she-devil. Unfriendly and sinister, she was rumored to have slain previous husbands before arriving in Kansas, and she dabbled in folk magic, claiming to be a medium who could cast spells. While she claimed not to understand English, a moment of rage during a confrontation later revealed her command of the language was far better than she let on. The younger generation presented a stark contrast. John Bender Jr., about 25, was handsome and spoke English well, though with a German accent. He had a peculiar habit of laughing without cause, which led many in the community to suspect there was something wrong with him. This perception, whether genuine or an act, made him seem harmless and non-threatening, a perfect disguise for the violence he was capable of. The public face and undisputed star of the operation was Kate Bender. Around 23 years old, she was universally described as beautiful, intelligent, and intensely charismatic. She was fluent in English and was the only member of the family who actively engaged with the surrounding community. Kate was the family's lure, and her chosen bait was spiritualism. In an era when communicating with the dead was a popular and widespread belief, Kate advertised herself as a powerful psychic, healer, and spiritualist medium. She distributed flyers and gave lectures, claiming she could cure blindness and deafness with the laying on of hands, contact the spirits of the deceased, and locate lost possessions. Her lectures also promoted radical ideas like free love, which, while scandalous, only added to her notoriety and drew curious visitors to the family inn. And by curious travelers, I mean men traveling alone who definitely thought they had a chance with this frontier cutie. Kate's persona was the perfect tool for disarming travelers, and she was basically the honeypot that lured victims in. With her charm and supposed supernatural gifts, she could win their trust. This would draw them into intimate conversations where they would reveal their travel plans and, most importantly, their financial situations. The very foundation of this group was built on lies. While they were widely believed to be German immigrants, no official documentation of their origins, or even their real names, has ever been discovered. The name Bender itself, while a fairly common German name, was almost certainly an alias. Even their family ties were likely a complete fabrication. Neighbors reported that the intimacy between John Jr. and Kate seemed more like that of a husband and wife than siblings. The reason for doing this was also a part of their ruse. In a society built on the family unit, the image of a family-run inn offered a veneer of safety and respectability that was crucial to their predatory success. The Benders' genius for evil was not just in their deception, but in their engineering. They transformed their humble, one-room cabin into a highly efficient machine capable of quote-unquote processing guests. The cabin was a simple wooden structure measuring about 16 by 24 feet. Inside, they had made a simple but critical modification. A large, heavy canvas wagon cover was hung from a rope, splitting the single room in two. The front area was the public face of their operation, a small general store and a dining room where travelers could get a meal. The area behind the curtain was the family's private quarters, but its true purpose was to serve as a blind from which to launch their ambush. Their modus operandi was a chillingly refined process. After Kate identified a suitable victim, usually a man traveling alone with significant money, he would be invited to dinner and given the seat of honor at the table. This seat wasn't a gesture of hospitality, it was a tactical position. It placed the guest with his back directly against the canvas partition, perfectly silhouetting his head for the attacker waiting behind it. As the unsuspecting traveler ate his meal, captivated by Kate's charm and conversation, one of the male Benders would slip behind the curtain. At the right moment, the attacker would swing a heavy hammer, striking the victim on the back of the head with crushing force. Beneath the victim's chair, or immediately beside it, was a concealed trapdoor. The stunned or dead man was immediately dropped through the opening into a dark, stone-lined cellar that was 6 feet deep. This allowed for the instant removal of the body from the main room, minimizing mess and the risk of discovery should another guest arrive. The body was then stripped of every valuable before being disposed of. Under the cover of night, the bodies were removed from this subterranean abattoir and buried in the family's 2-acre vegetable garden and apple orchard just north of the cabin. In a particularly macabre detail passed down through local lore, it was said that Elvira Bender used the apples from the trees growing over her victims' graves to bake pies for future travelers. The Benders' reign of terror lasted for nearly 2 years, from May 1871 to the spring of 1873. During that time, they eliminated at least a dozen people, though the true number may be much higher. Their victims were the forgotten travelers of the frontier, men whose disappearances created distant ripples of concern, but no organized alarm until it was far too late. After all, Kate was an expert at finding men who were very far from home, and whose disappearances wouldn't be noticed for months or even years. The case that finally brought an end to the Benders' slaughter began with the disappearance of George Newton Longcore and his 18-month-old daughter Mary Ann in the winter of 1872. A recent widower, Longcore was traveling back to Iowa and was carrying a significant sum of money. When they vanished, Longcore's former neighbor from Independence, a physician named Dr. William York, became concerned and set out to find them in the spring of 1873. Dr. York's search led him along the Osage Trail and inevitably to the Bender Inn, where he, too, disappeared. The attack on Dr. York was the Benders' final overreach. For 2 years, they had preyed on the anonymous and the transient, individuals whose disappearances could be easily dismissed. Dr. York, however, was a prominent man, and more importantly, his brother was Colonel Alexander York, a Kansas state senator. Unlike the families of other victims, Colonel York had the influence, resources, and unwavering determination to mobilize a search and demand answers. In March 1873, Colonel Alexander York arrived at the Benders Inn, methodically retracing his brother's last known movements. During his initial questioning, the family deployed their well-practiced deception. They admitted Dr. York had stopped there, but insisted he'd continued on his way. They casually suggested he might have fallen victim to an attack by a local tribe or by highwaymen, common and convenient explanations for such disappearances. Kate, the master manipulator, pretended to be deeply concerned and offered to hold a seance to contact his spirit, telling the colonel to return another day. She let him know that he needed to come back alone, in what was a brazen attempt to make the investigator their next victim. But Colonel York was not easily fooled, and he sensed a profound evil in the small cabin and left, deeply suspicious. His doubts were confirmed when he learned of another traveler, a woman who had recently fled the inn in terror after Elvira threatened her with a knife. York returned, this time with an armed posse of men that definitely weren't clowning around. The confrontation was tense, and Elvira's subsequent explosion of rage shattered her facade as a simple woman who couldn't speak English. This outburst further solidified Colonel York's conviction that the family was hiding a dark secret, but in the end, nothing happened yet. As York's investigation intensified, the wider community, already on edge from the string of disappearances, reached a breaking point. A town meeting was convened where dozens of local men gathered to decide on a course of action. They resolved to obtain a warrant and conduct a search of every single homestead in the township. In an act of astonishing audacity, the Bender men were also present at that meeting. They sat among their neighbors, listening as the community organized the very search that would inevitably unearth the bodies buried in their own garden. It was a final, desperate gamble to appear innocent, an attempt to deflect suspicion that was doomed to fail. The Benders knew the moment the vote was taken that their time was up. They could perhaps deceive a lone questioner, but they couldn't survive a systematic, official search of their property. Sometime in the days following the meeting, under the cover of the vast Kansas night, they packed what they could, abandoned their homestead, and vanished. Their escape was discovered a few days later when a neighbor noticed their farm animals were starving and the inn was eerily silent. Unfortunately, a spell of bad weather delayed a formal investigation, giving the Benders a crucial head start of nearly a month to disappear into the American frontier. When the search party finally forced their way into the abandoned Bender cabin in early May 1873, they were met with a scene of hurried departure and an overpowering stench of death. The source of the odor was quickly traced to a trap door under a bed, which had been nailed shut. After prying it open, they peered down into the stone-lined cellar. The pit was empty of bodies, but the floor was caked with so much clotted blood that it had soaked deep into the earth below, irrefutable proof that this had been a place of slaughter. The search then moved outside to the family's small apple orchard and vegetable garden. The ground in the orchard was soft and appeared to have been recently disturbed. The men began to probe the soil, and it wasn't long before they made their first horrific discovery: the body of Dr. William York, buried in a shallow grave. The news spread, and a full-scale excavation began. Over the next day, the searchers unearthed a graveyard. One by one, they uncovered the remains of at least 10 more people, including George Longcore and his infant daughter. The story of the Bender's House of Horrors became a national sensation. Newspapers from New York to Chicago sent reporters to the remote Kansas prairie, and their lurid accounts of the Devil's Kitchen captivated the public. These accounts took the already horrific realities and added new fictionalized elements in an effort to sell more papers. After fleeing their farm, the Benders' trail quickly went cold. Investigators found their abandoned wagon near the town of Thayer, just 12 miles to the north. But from there, the trail vanished completely. A massive manhunt was launched, and the Kansas governor offered a $2,000 reward, a fortune at the time, for information leading to their capture. What happened to the Benders remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the Old West, a narrative vacuum that has been filled with two powerful and competing theories. The first is that they simply got away. In the vast, unmapped expanse of 19th century America, it was entirely possible for 4 people to change their names, split up, and begin new lives without a trace. This theory is bolstered by the numerous false sightings and wrongful arrests that plagued investigators for decades. In 1880, a couple in Nebraska was arrested and even confessed, but they were soon exposed as imposters. In 1889, 2 women were arrested in Michigan and extradited to Kansas on suspicion of being Elvira and Kate, only to be exonerated when their alibis proved solid. These incidents reflect a public desperate for closure, but they also highlight how easily the fugitives could have blended back into society, either in America or elsewhere. The second, more pervasive theory is that the Benders met a swift and brutal end at the hands of a vigilante posse. According to this version of events, a group of enraged neighbors caught up with the family shortly after they fled. They dispensed their own form of frontier justice, forcing confessions from the Benders before eliminating them. While no physical evidence supports this story, it aligns with the harsh realities of the frontier, where communities often took the law into their own hands when official channels failed. The secrecy of such an extrajudicial act would neatly explain why no one ever came forward to claim the substantial reward. Today, more than 150 years later, the search for answers continues, and who the Benders were and what happened to them remains a historical, unsolved mystery. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy, just reminding you to like and subscribe and to click the share button and send it to the history fans in your life. Also, don't forget to check out the Patreon or the YouTube membership to support my work further. Late one September night in 1903, the quiet farming community of Van Meter, Iowa lay dark and silent. Without warning, that silence was shattered by a bizarre disturbance. While walking home after midnight, local businessman U.G. Griffith noticed a strange light bobbing atop a downtown building. As he approached, the light vanished, and he initially suspected a prankster with a lantern, but the light's uncanny movements quickly defied that explanation. Moments later, it reappeared on another rooftop entirely, darting far too swiftly for any human. The next night, around 1 a.m., Dr. Fred Alcott was jarred awake by a blinding beam shining through his window. Grabbing his gun, he rushed into the street and came face to face with an unimaginable sight. Also, by the way, if you're into people just wildly blasting at unidentified creatures, this is absolutely the story for you. But let's get back to the tale of the Van Meter visitor. The good doctor saw a towering humanoid figure, at least 8 or 9 feet tall, with enormous bat-like wings. A blunt horn protruded from its forehead, and from that horn a brilliant light shone, as if a living searchlight were attached to the creature's head. In a panic, Alcott fired 5 shots at the monster, despite it posing no apparent threat, but the bullets had no effect. The winged being simply turned and glided off into the darkness, leaving the stunned doctor trembling in the silent street. By the following day, news of the winged visitor spread, and fear took hold of the town. On the 3rd night of sightings, bank cashier Clarence Dunn kept watch at his workplace, determined to confront whatever was lurking in the dark. In the dead of night, a bright light suddenly flooded through the bank's window. The creature was outside. Dunn grabbed a shotgun and fired through the glass, sending the intruder flapping away into the shadows. In the morning, townsfolk found huge 3-toed footprints in the mud near the bank's door, nothing like tracks of any known animal. Excited and alarmed, Dunn cast one of the prints in plaster as proof of the encounter. Not long after, a hardware merchant named Orville White had his own chilling run-in with this animal, and you best believe Orville was strapped and ready for battle. Awakening to strange sounds, he stepped outside with a rifle at the ready and a revolver as backup and saw the beast perched atop a telephone pole, its forehead light cutting through the darkness. White took aim and shot at the creature, as was the style at the time. Yet again it shrugged off the attack, and this time it unleashed a repulsive, overpowering odor like rotting flesh. The smell hit White like a physical force, knocking him unconscious where he stood. From then on, reports consistently noted a terrible stench accompanying the creature wherever it went. The once skeptical townspeople were now convinced something real and dangerous was stalking their streets. According to one newspaper, all of Van Meter's men, women, and children were in a state of terror. By nightfall, the town fell silent as residents locked themselves indoors, desperately hoping to avoid the glowing horn and sweeping wings of the visitor. Notably, the eyewitnesses, a doctor, a banker, and a businessman, were all respected citizens, not known for telling tall tales. Their testimony forced skeptics to take the reports seriously. After nearly a week of nightly horrors, the townsfolk decided to take action. A group of armed men, many of whom may have been shaggy and/or violent, formed a posse to hunt down the mysterious creature once and for all. They noticed the beast always seemed to appear from the direction of the old abandoned coal mine on the edge of town. The posse suspected that the mine might be its lair, and theorized that perhaps the creature had been disturbed by mining operations. They knew what they had to do next. The men were going to prepare for the most epic boss fight of their lives. The posse set up an ambush at the mine's entrance in the pre-dawn hours of October 3rd. They huddled in the cool pre-dawn darkness, nerves on edge as every rustle of wind made their trigger fingers twitch. The monster suddenly emerged from the mine shaft, and right behind it came a second, smaller but similar creature. The men opened fire immediately, emptying their weapons into the two figures. But just like before, bullets didn't bring them down. The creatures only let out unearthly screeches and retreated into the mine's depths, vanishing for good into the darkness underground. Not willing to let them escape, the posse hastily barricaded the mine entrance with boards and rocks, determined to imprison the beasts below forever. After that fateful morning, the Van Meter visitor and its companion were never seen again. What remained were frightened but relieved townspeople, and an incredible story that would be retold for generations. In the aftermath, people struggled to classify what the Van Meter visitor could have been. The bizarre description, part human, part bat, with a luminous horn, invited comparisons to other legendary creatures. Contemporary accounts pulled from local Native American legends of the region that also speak of giant supernatural birds. Thunderbirds that could shoot lightning from their eyes or beaks were well known in the area even by that time, with sightings being somewhat common. The notion of a huge winged being emitting blinding light resonated with those ancient tales, leading some to wonder if the story of the Van Meter visitor was the legendary creature. A few more imaginative souls even mused that perhaps it had been a gargoyle come to life. Later cryptid enthusiasts drew upon the broader lore about these creatures. Some noted similarities to the Jersey Devil, a famed New Jersey cryptid described as a winged, horned creature, suggesting that it may have moved west along the frontier. Others likened it to something like West Virginia's Mothman, another mysterious flying humanoid known for glowing eyes and haunting appearances. Researchers and skeptics offered more grounded theories to explain the Van Meter mystery. One possibility was a case of mistaken identity, that ordinary animals had been misperceived under extraordinary conditions. Also, for anyone who's been with my channel since the beginning, almost 2 years ago now, you can already predict what I'm going to say next. A large great horned owl might loom frighteningly in dim light, and their features could be distorted by fear. For example, an owl's glowing eyes or a heron's silhouette might convince a startled witness they'd seen a monster with a shining horn. The plaster cast of the three-toed footprints could even have been an unusual bird track, interpreted as something monstrous by imaginative locals. So yeah, it could have been a standard owl misidentification, a theory I personally have about a lot of otherworldly encounters. In addition, some historians have suggested the incident was an elaborate hoax or mass panic. Early 20th century newspapers were known for publishing sensational wild monster tales, and it's possible a prankster in Van Meter sparked a chain reaction of hysteria. Once a few terrified reports came out, others might have subconsciously exaggerated their own encounters. Fear can be infectious, and a collective fright might have led the townspeople to literally shoot at shadows, convincing themselves a fantastic creature was afoot. Of course, there are those who maintain that something truly unexplained visited Van Meter. More paranormal theories propose that the creature was not a misidentified bird or a hoax at all, but perhaps a cryptid or supernatural entity. Some paranormal enthusiasts think the visitor might have been a prehistoric survivor, maybe a living pterosaur that found refuge in the caves. This would explain its leathery wings and horned reptilian appearance. Others go even further with this theory, hinting it could have been a literal interdimensional pterosaur that slipped through a portal from a dinosaur realm. That, they argue, might clarify why bullets had no effect. Perhaps the creature wasn't fully here in our physical reality. And yeah, just as a quick aside, the partially manifesting interdimensional pterosaur theory of the Van Meter visitor mystery should be in a textbook explaining why Occam's razor is a thing. Today, the Van Meter visitor story lives on as a proud piece of local lore and a fascination for cryptozoologists. Much like many localized cryptids, the Van Meter visitor was given its own festival in the town in 2013. No single explanation, natural or supernatural, has ever definitively laid the legend to rest. And over a century later, we're still left to question what visited Van Meter in 1903. Okay, so just as I'm finishing up editing on this video, I gotta toss in some additional commentary since the potential absurdity of this story hit me hard. If the Van Meter visitor was nothing more than an owl, then what unfolded in that small Iowa town was darkly comedic. Picture it: a terrified posse of armed, respectable townsmen marching into the woods, guns loaded, hearts pounding, lanterns swinging wildly. They approach the mine not to battle an interdimensional creature, not to confront a prehistoric survivor, but to flush out two confused owls that had roosted in peace. When the winged figures emerged, likely blinking in the light and flapping awkwardly, this insane posse of clowns fired a couple of volley of bullets at the poor birds. They missed, so I guess perhaps you could say they couldn't hit the broadside of a barn owl. And when the birds flapped back into the mine, probably just trying to get away from the noise, the posse declared victory by sealing some owls in a dark shaft.